without further ado, I will hand it over to Aaroh.
Yeah, sweet. Let's see. I will stop your screen sharing and hold that. Cool. Do we see this now?
Yep.
Okay, sweet, sweet, sweet. Cool. Fantastic. So, wait, how do I go back? Okay, cool. So my name's Aaroh. I'm currently working as a software engineer on a developer experience team at Plaid. And previously I worked in storage at Facebook, which is a very infra heavy role. These are kind of tech credentials, not finance credentials, but just in case you have questions about this as well, happy to answer those. So a main note before I go into this talk is it's going to be an extremely transparent talk about money, how I save and invest my money and how much money I have, period. I know it's a sensitive topic, but no one was ever open about finances. I didn't go to UCR that long ago. So I don't know, 2-3 years ago, no one really talked about money amongst my friends or even the alumni that came back and visited. And I really wish someone had, and I would have been better prepared for basically jumping into a 6-figure income and trying to figure out what the hell am I supposed to do with this. So to talk about it as transparently as possible, I've kind of just set out a timeline of my net worths over time and kind of what I've done to kind of accumulate this money, for example. So yeah, starting off in high school or pre-college, my net worth was a fat $0. I worked at an internship that paid $15 an hour. It happened to be a tech internship, but I think making $15 an hour is pretty standard now. I didn't know what to do with that money, so I kind of just put it in my checking account and bought fun stuff with it. Started college, net worth about $5,000. I did freelance web development, only ever enough to pay for the bills, so I never put in full-time working hours or anything like that. And this was enough to kind of pay for college bills. And so I was lucky enough to not graduate with that, but I know that isn't the case for a lot of people. The main focus for me was school and getting a full-time offer, which leads to the next thing. Year one of work, so after year one, net worth is about 150K. I worked at Facebook out of college, like I kind of mentioned. They gave me a pretty massive sign-on bonus, which is the majority of this 150. My total comp that first year was about 200K. And I learned about this thing called the FIRE movement, which is the financially independent retire early movement. Basically saving and investing a bunch of your money so that you don't have to retire at 65, you can retire at 30, 40, basically whenever you want. Year two post college, net worth was about 300,000. I had continued investing in the last year. I bought a house, so the investments kind of slowed down a bit. But 2020, 2021 were great years. I actually should have more than doubled my stuff here. So yeah, bought a house, started a new job, and technically, I think it's let's see what it says. Yeah, technically I make less now, and I'll talk about that later. Plaid isn't a public company, so I basically hold shares that are considered paper money, and that's right now a little bit past 2 years. Paper money is basically shares in a company that aren't public, meaning you can't share them or sell them until the company goes public. And I'm still learning a lot day by day. So yeah, can't talk about when or if the IPO is going to happen, unfortunately, sorry. So that's kind of the whole timeline. The house was $630,000. I put a 20% down payment on it. And yeah, my monthly mortgage payment is $2,600, including insurance, property taxes, all that fun stuff. Sweet. So what were the big 4 takeaways from my experience? Number one, there's this concept of paying yourself first. Essentially, you budget once for the lifestyle that you want to live, and you forget everything else forever. So for me, what that looks like is anything beyond $60,000 just gets sent to an account that I never even I can't use it to pay off my credit card bills, basically. And so basically that limits my lifestyle to 60,000 and below. And so even if I make more money, that doesn't mean I get to buy nicer stuff, which touches on point number 3. Point number 2 is this investing order of operations, which I learned from a resource that I will show you. And I will also kind of zoom into this order of operations and what this entails. Right now, this might be a bunch of buzzwords to you. Number 3, lifestyle inflation hurts. Every monthly expense that you tack on, whether that's a higher rent payment, a car payment, etc., is going to hurt you a lot in the long run. One-time purchases, not so bad, but they should still be saved for and accounted for. And yeah, just because you make more money doesn't mean you can afford cooler stuff. Number 4, it's that you can take risks, software engineers are lucky enough to earn a lot of money. And so it's okay to spend some of that on riskier investments once you have kind of a nest egg of safe investments, like set aside, like you have a good nest egg there. And obviously only ever invest what you can lose in the riskier investments. The safe investments are more or less guaranteed. Yeah, I can talk about what the investments are and what the investments is later on. So those are the 4 big takeaways. We're going to zoom into this investing or order of operations. Let me take a sip of water first, but feel free to read it. Cool. So we have this like order of operations, this list of things that you can do. And so you can relatively treat this as an ordered list, actually. I probably should have done that. The first thing is to have an emergency fund. I treat this as 3 to 12 months of expenses on hand, whatever that is for you. And that should just be in like a high yield savings account. Next, you want to contribute to a 401k. At minimum, you want to contribute what your employer maxes out. At maximum, you can contribute 20.5k a year. And yeah, if you can max it out, max it out. Next up is what's called next up is high interest debt. So your student loans may or may not be that. If it is more than 7%, I think you should refinance those to be lower, or like put them together into one loan if you have multiple loans and make it lower. If it's higher than 7%, then make more payments on it. If it's less than 7%, I would suggest making the minimum payment until like this last individual brokerage step. But obviously, I think I have to preface this by saying like this isn't personal financial advice. So don't sue me if you do these things and you end up in a not fun spot or something. But this is what I would do if I had a high interest debt, because this is what I've read online and in books. Next, you have what's called like an IRA. You can contribute up to $6,000 a year. A traditional IRA, you don't pay taxes when you contribute. So you will essentially, with a traditional IRA, you'll put money into it. And when you do your taxes the next year, you'll say, oh, I put $6,000 into a traditional IRA. Then the IRS will say, oh, okay, we'll give you back the taxes that you paid on that $6,000 because a traditional IRA is meant to be pre-tax. You can choose to do a traditional or a Roth, which basically says like, you paid taxes on this money already, screw dealing with the IRS. Let's just like contribute 6K. And then in the future, if you were to ever withdraw the gains that you made on that 6K, you don't have to pay taxes on that, which is beneficial, or like you want to, you can't have both. So 6K, either in a traditional or a Roth, but you can't do both. Yeah, unfortunately. Next, I would do like medium-term goals. For me, that was something like buying a house, or it could be anything substantial. If you really, really want like a nice car, then maybe like this is where it would go. Next up is an after-tax 401k. The keyword to Google here is a mega backdoor Roth IRA. It's dependent on the 401k plan that your employer offers. So you should be asking your employer whether or not they support this plan. But you can contribute even more. The limit is actually something like, so it's like 57,000 minus what you already contributed to your 401k minus your employer match. So it works out to about 37, 35K for most people. And then individual brokerage is like the last step. You can continue investing in safer stuff, or you can do riskier things. You can also like pay down debt if you want to pay down debt first. That's kind of the order of operations, the list of things that you should tackle in order, in my opinion. Okay, 3 holy grail resources for you to consider. The first is a subreddit. I know most subreddits are pretty toxic, or they just like spout stuff. Like if you go to like Wall Street investing or Wall Street bets or something like that, the financial independence is not like that. It's a very logical Reddit community that talks about finances, and the main point here is to set you up for an early retirement, and that includes paying down debt, which yeah, I think someone asked about earlier. So Samarth asked about earlier. Next up is a book called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Roman Sethi. Very clickbait title, but if you're gonna read one book to set yourself up financially, it should be this one. It basically just talks about like absolutely everything you need to do in your life to set yourself up, including like the insane specifics, like you should open up a high yield savings account, make sure the interest rate is X, put money into this account and this account when you get a paycheck or whatever that is. Incredible detail. Then there's this flowchart that I'll get on acmucr.org/links with whoever wants to coordinate this with me. But it basically talks about this order of operations, but in even more detail, which is like very easy to get into. So like It'll basically be like branches in the flowchart of like, if you make X amount, then you should probably do a traditional IRA. If you make this amount, you should do a Roth. Those kinds of like micro operations, and decision making is like really good in that flowchart. That's about it. Very information dense, I know. So we have lots of time for questions. I've put some here to like spark some ideas, but if you have any other ones, feel free to drop them in the chat, unmute, whatever you want to do, works for me. So you can also just like repeat one of the questions on here that you're interested in knowing about.
As far as like long-term goals go, I was just wondering, like, how do you kind of prioritize whether you want to make investments in like a house, like to use as an Airbnb, for example, or like you're actually gonna use it as like a living accommodation? Have you ever like maybe thought about how to kind of balance that, or
Yeah, that makes sense. So I would consider like saving up for house hacking or for an Airbnb as one of these like medium-term goals. So like for me, it was buying my own house, but for someone else, it could be buying an Airbnb or buying a duplex, whatever. I think like the lowest cost or the lowest friction way to get into this would be to, one, like live in an area where duplexes are actually like kind of affordable. And so like that's not going to be the Bay Area. It's not really going to be Seattle either. And so like if you live in an area where it's affordable, then like sure, go for it. Make sure you do your math, make sure like the amount of money you're charging for rent actually makes sense to like cash flow and that kind of thing. But like there's a lot of upfront research necessary, and I like personally didn't have the time to do it. But in terms of like when you would do it, you would probably do it then. And also make sure to like overestimate repair and maintenance and cleaning costs, because those are like what's really going to bite into your monthly profits. Okay, Suchi, we have some questions in the chat too, right? Okay, if you love what you're doing as work, you have to retire early. I love being a software engineer. I think it's like really, really fun, right? The way I see retiring early working is basically you don't have to be reliant on your job to kind of pay for your expenses. So what does that like open up for you, right? So you can now, for example, like work at a startup, right? That is just going to pay you in equity, but you really like what the startup is doing. And they might pay you some like base salary as well, and they should. But now you don't have to worry about like, what is the rest of my life going to look like if I work at this startup and it feels like a waste of my time? But it wouldn't anymore because you're technically retired and you can just pay for your expenses forever. Yeah, that's kind of like how I think about it. And I would still recommend getting to a point where you could say at any moment that like, oh, screw it, I'm retired, I'm never working again. Yeah, okay. So any guide on things like the S&P 500 or Vanguard? Vanguard is a company that hosts a bunch of these accounts. So for example, you can have your Roth IRA or traditional IRA, your individual brokerage, depending on your company, your 401k might also be with Vanguard. It's much like Fidelity and that kind of stuff. And so the S&P 500 is an index that tracks these like top 500 companies in the US. And it's generally considered like a safe investment that definitely grows over time. Over long-term periods of time. And so I fully invest in the S&P 500. I don't invest in anything else other than like my house, obviously, which goes up in price. But yeah, I heavily support using Vanguard as a fantastic like company to use. I used Fidelity when I first started work because Facebook used Fidelity for their 401k. And so yeah, like that's what I do. Steven asks, how much did I invest in the stock market? Yeah, so right now, you can imagine that out of the current net worth of like 350K, about 200K of that is in my house as like equity. And so you consider net worth as total assets minus total liabilities, assets being the price of the home, liability being the cost of the mortgage. And so 200,000 of the 350 is in the house, and the other 150 is in kind of the stock market, S&P 500, that kind of stuff. Let's see. Yeah, so examples of riskier investments might be like single stocks. So you can imagine like you really, really believe in Square and like what they're doing in the fintech e-commerce space. And so you want to just dump like a ton of money into Square. I would consider a single stock a riskier investment. I would also consider all crypto coins are riskier investment than like the S&P 500. So if like you want to invest in those kinds of things, just make sure you like set yourself up beforehand first. And I'm talking about like kind of after work. In college, as long as your bills are getting paid, doesn't really matter so much. Let's see, what other questions? Okay, yeah, CDs are cool. I would never use one just because I consider it to be almost like too safe. And so I'm never gonna want or need, I don't know what the CD rates are right now, but when I was looking at them, it was like 2% or 3%. To me, like a 3% rate of return over a year isn't going to be useful for anything. If you really want to do it and have like a sense of safety, then like they're a fantastic kind of like investing method that's very safe. I do still set aside income for fun things, absolutely. And so when you kind of come up with this budget, where is it? Here, like that's 60K, right? When I came up with that 60K number, this also accounts for basically like $1,000 in fun money a month. That can be like on fancy restaurants, on buying cool stuff for myself, like that kind of things. So account for it, like account for fun money. I'm definitely not advocating for like, don't have any fun, invest all your money, and like you'll be rich in 10, 20 years. Yeah, don't do that. It's beneficial to pay off the education loan first or prolong it. Yeah, so if your current education loan is 0%, then I don't think you should pay it back because it's 0% right now. But once it comes back, then I would probably use it. But yeah, like I mentioned, I didn't really have any like educational loans. I'm not like too knowledgeable on the details of this. But in general, I would say like if it falls within that higher than 7% interest rate, try to pay it off sooner. And if it's less than 7% interest rate, pay it off later. Yeah, so that's a good question. So you're given RSUs when you work as a software engineer at a company. Essentially, RSUs are reserved stock units. When you sign an offer with a company, they basically say, for example, we'll give you 400 shares of Facebook. Each share is like $100, and that's your grant price. Over time, as you work there, you'll essentially get 6.25% of those shares, of those 100 shares, every quarter that you work there. And the benefit here is that you're getting shares, not dollars. So if by the time these 6.25% of shares have increased in price, instead of getting, I don't know, whatever the math is, say it's like 1,000 or say it's like 10 grand. Instead of getting 10 grand every quarter, you're actually getting like more money. Bullish on this company. There's two types of taxes when you have stock or something like this. Short-term capital gains tax means that you sold it. Wait, can you all hear me? Or am I? Okay, cool. Got it. Okay, I'll talk about taxes again. Sorry, fun stuff. Okay, short-term tax or long-term tax. Short-term tax means that you held the stock for less than 1 year before selling it. This is taxed as normal income, traditionally around 20%, you can assume. Long-term capital gains tax is when you've held a stock for more than a year. Then you pay a flat rate, which is, I think, 15% on these shares. So you can assume that if you think the stock is going to go up between the amount of tax that the income taxes, so say it's 25%, and the short-term capital gains tax or long-term capital gains tax, which is 15%. If you think the stock is going to go up 10% in a year and you're very bullish on this, then feel free to hold it. I personally never chose to hold Facebook stock because I think it's like super volatile with like media and stuff going around it. And so yeah, every time I invested, I sold immediately, paid the short-term capital gains tax on it. They actually withhold the money for you, so you're not like having to pay like 30 grand at the end of tax season. So they withhold shares from you and give you the rest kind of post-tax. And then yeah, you can then use that money to invest in whatever. I then invested in the S&P 500. Yeah. All of your stock, like 100% of them, no, I would never do that. So timing the market works both ways. You can choose to buy, like buy low, right? That's one part of timing the market. And there's also selling high, which is the second part of timing the market. I would never try to time the market. It's probably the worst decision you'll ever make if you decide to do it. Time in the market is going to be a lot better. Just invest as much as you can, as early as you can, and like let it ride for 10 years, and you'll be better. Yeah, so for me, I'm aiming to be at this like retirement point by so the question is what number of years before retirement, and what does retirement look like for me? Um, for me, that looks like potentially teaching, potentially working at a startup where I don't care about money. And I actually really enjoy teaching. I had an amazing teacher in high school, kind of like the reason why I got this internship in the first place when I was in high school. And so I want to be able to do the same for other people. So potentially teaching, potentially just like working at a startup again, where I really like the mission, but I don't care about the money so much. Number of years, I'm aiming for this to be 28. It may or may not be 28, but I'm setting a very aggressive goal for myself so that you land somewhere halfway. You land at the 80th percentile, you're still fine. But 28 would be fantastic, right? Like if you no longer have to work for money at that age. Yeah, 20. I know it's I don't know. It is nuts. Okay, what are some of the main differences between different brokerages? Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, the specific reason I chose Fidelity was literally just because I wanted all of my money in one place, so that I only had to log into one website. It's like that's about as much decision-making framework as you need from choosing between people. Like you can literally just choose the brokerage that has like the best UI that you like. Like Fidelity has a great UI, and like TD Ameritrade traditionally has like a very shitty UI. Charles Schwab has a very bad UI. And so like I would never use those two, that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, just pick the one that you want. There's really not much of a difference. Let's see. How does a marriage affect those retirement plans? It doesn't. Um, my girlfriend also makes a ton of money, and so she has her own like goals, and will probably also be making similar goals as mine. So yeah, doesn't affect anything. Yeah. So when you hit retirement, there's something called the 4% rule. First question, part zero to Kobe's question is when do you hit retirement, right? It's actually one of the questions I like, it's kind of hoping someone asks because it's one of the questions I didn't talk about. But like, when can you retire, right? So there's this thing called the rule of or the 4% rule, or like the rule of 25x. Essentially, what you do is you take your expenses that you expect to be roughly the same for kind of your whole life, like whatever expenses you want to account for. Um, you multiply that by 25 and you get this like massive number. So for example, if your expenses are 40 grand a year, you multiply this by 25, you get a million. This basically means if you hit $1 million in total investments, you can continually withdraw 4% of $1 million and basically just have $40,000 like paid for forever. And that accounts for inflation because 4% will grow with inflation as well. Because like there's some studies done on this. The stock market roughly grows at 8% per year. So you're doing 4% plus inflation costs. Um, and the goal is that within some like 30-year time horizon, you never run out of money, which is pretty cool. So yeah, like multiply your expenses by 25, and that's when you do it, and you sell 4% of your total investments every year. And you could do like 1% per quarter, for example. So if you're doing $40,000 a year, you could sell 10,000 January 1st, 10,000 March 1st, June 1st, August 1st, whatever the actual dates end up being. Uh, I don't know. So I make TikToks if people didn't know about this. Um, and yeah, I have a lot of videos that I put a lot of time into and then they flop. Um, one of these series has been this like guide to financial independence thing. It does crap on my page, and so I don't post it anymore. Um, yeah, but like the financial independence ones, I was really proud of making because it took me so long to learn. But then no one liked it, and I was like, okay, fine. I guess I'll stop this early. But now I get to give it to all, however many there are of you, which is still just as satisfying. Let's see. If you're living with your parents and have no bills, is a move just to invest all your money? Yes, absolutely. If I were doing it personally, I would be giving my parents some money or like paying for my own food or something like that, but not required. Yeah, I would, if you can live with your parents and work, like you're working remotely, then like you should do that. And someone's linked to my TikTok account. Great. If you're interested, feel free to take a look. That's kind of weird. Any other questions? I don't know what time we're at. It's like 30 minutes. Once you reach retirement, sure. I assume there's like a question to that statement. You just have to save up for them. So again, you have your expenses, which is 60K, which again, for example, in my case, right, you have 60K. And then you have fund money out of this, right? But now you don't have fund money, you have to save the fund money. And then eventually you will have saved up enough to like pay for a house or a car or whatever. But in general, like you would only retire when you're at like a stable point in life, kind of. Or if you want to make a big purchase like this, you could start working again, use that new job to kind of just save completely for this new expense that you want. But in general, you want to reach a pretty stable point in your life where you're not expecting any large changes before you do that. Yeah, do you think there will be an appreciable difference? I actually think actively managing your portfolio will land you in a worse place than choosing an index and just like sitting there. So in general, there have been lots of studies on this. Like 99% of individual investors, people who manage their own portfolios, hedge fund investors, whatever, are unable to beat the S&P 500. There's this really cool graph that you should go look up. It's Warren Buffett's like total investments, and it's like increasing very slowly, like a little turtle. And then there's Kathy Woods, who she got really popular last year, the year before, because of these like ARK investments, ARKK, which basically invested like 80% into Tesla or something. It was like very risky stocks, which played out extremely well for her in 2020 and 2021. Then this like recent tech crash happened, and she is now like below Warren Buffett, who's just been like slowly eking his way up. So over time, again, long time horizons is kind of what you have to think in when you're investing. 30 plus years, you are going to be better off just investing in something like the S&P 500 or VTI or VT-SAX or something like this, and just letting it ride for 30 years. So startups after graduating, not a good idea. Another great idea, they still pay a lot of money. And so the only difference is like, look, like working at FANG isn't possible for everyone, right? Like not everyone gets to work at a FANG out of college. And that's mostly because of luck, not because of skill. You're all great engineers. But interview questions are hard. I don't pass them 100% of the time either. I have failed plenty of engineering interviews. Working in a startup doesn't mean you're worse off. It just means you're making less money right now, which means you just can't go through like this entire order of operations and like max everything out all the time. So you just like go up until you're kind of like out of money. If that means you can only pay for your expenses right now, fine. If it means all you can do is pay for your expenses and contribute to your 401k, that's still fine. You'll get a new job eventually, and that will pay more money, and then you'll be able to tick off more things on this list. Yeah, I don't touch crypto or NFTs. I have $1,000 in Ethereum, and that's it. Yeah, no. I very personal opinions, right? But like I'm staying away, just because like I don't like the mentality behind it, I guess. Any other questions? Yeah, so there's actually multiple ways to invest in the S&P 500. A lot of funds track it. You have to look at the kind of, what's it called? So the S&P 500 is basically just 500 companies in the US. There is no like international S&P 500. Every company has their own. I think I remember looking up Britain's at one point during COVID just to see, because like there's this whole thing about the US doing like a K recovery, which basically means we dipped and then went back up. And England and Britain actually didn't do that. They continued to dip after COVID. They never like spiked back up like the US did. And so I know other countries have their own. S&P 500 is only the US. You can invest using kind of like any index fund that tracks the S&P 500, but you can't invest directly in the S&P 500. There is no official S&P 500 index fund. There is an official index. So for example, the funds you might want to look into are VTO, which is Vanguard's S&P 500 fund. Fidelity's is FXAIX, which is longer, but same thing. If you invest in either of these, for example, your money will grow the same way. There's very, very little difference between the two. When you invest in a fund, though, you want to look at the total expense ratio of this fund and make sure it's like 0.02% or lower. If it's any higher than that, it's not worth your time. The expense ratio is basically like how much is the fund charging you to offer that fund. And it should be very small because index funds are kind of like very hands-off, even for the funds themselves. Fidelity does no work for managing their FXAX fund. It's just an algorithm that continues to trade over time. And it's kind of a set it and forget it thing. Should you touch your invested money before you retire? I did, right? So like I had invested all of my money in the S&P 500 until I decided like I'm going to buy a house. And then I like sold a bunch of those shares to buy the house. And so, yeah, you totally can. I was like, it's a risky play. Technically, you're not supposed to save funds like buying a house in a brokerage account or in stocks. It's supposed to be in a high yield savings account because it's cash, it's stable. And you kind of like it shouldn't affect you which day you buy your house, which it does if you have all your money in stocks. You should be able to buy your house on a Monday. You should be able to buy it on a Tuesday. And so I kind of, didn't listen to that. And I was like, I'm just going to put it in the S&P 500. It'll go up over time. Luckily, I did that because my total investments grew by like 20% before I sold. And so essentially I was able to buy like 20% more house because of that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's up to you, but I chose to, but I don't think the general advice is you shouldn't. Multiple income streams are great. They require a lot of time, and so I choose not to do them. My TikTok, for example, like a lot of people monetize their TikTok. I don't, because it's not worth my time to monetize it. Also, I feel like it's very scammy to monetize free videos on the internet. Yeah, like to me, almost everything requires too much time. Anything you hear that's passive income is almost never passive. For example, if you're like renting out a house, there will always be issues with the house. Yes, you can hire a property management company. Did you hire like the right property management company? Are they charging too much? If something really major goes on, you're going to want to be more hands-on with like finding the right contractor or something anyways. If you're doing something like Turo, which is a popular side hustle, then you need to like clean the car. You need to somehow make sure it ends up in the right place. You need to deal with insurance claims, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anything else that you've ever heard being passive is never passive. If you sell a course online, you need to make sure that course stays up to date. You need to continue to market your course. If you're doing affiliate marketing, you need to continue marketing your affiliate links. So almost nothing is ever truly passive other than investing in the stock market and letting it ride, because I never check my investments. I just like the money goes in and it grows. I check my little like personal capital app on my phone to kind of see what my net worth is at any point in time. But I never like sell stocks or rebalance my portfolio. I never have to tell people about how much money I have and like why they should listen to me or anything like that. Yeah, those are my thoughts on multi-income streams. Good question. I quit Facebook because it was a really large company. The media presence was in general negative, which made me think the stock was not going to perform well on a long time period. And I was heavily invested in it. When you work at a company, you're heavily invested in that company succeeding because of your RSUs. Essentially, you're getting paid in shares. If the share price goes down over time, you're making less money. Or even if it goes up over time, if it doesn't go up as much as the market or as much as another company you could work at, then you're actually making less money over time. And so I switched to Plaid, which has a really high growth potential. I actually joined them just prior to Series D. So they were valued at 5 billion. I joined, they raised around like 2 weeks later. And then they raised at 13 billion. Essentially overnight, my stocks grew from like a total comp of 250 to a total comp of 330, which would never happen at a company like Facebook that's publicly traded. And so, yeah, that's why I switched. I would recommend Fidelity just because that's what I've used and I've never had any problems in terms of recommended brokers. Yeah, so in general, people in the industry will be pretty transparent about like their compensation and stuff. If they're not, to me, like that's a red flag of a person. And so I like don't associate with them too much. I'm always super happy to talk about TC and stuff because I don't want other people to be underpaid. If they make more than me, like go them, you know, like I'm happy for them. It doesn't affect me in the long term. And yeah, I've definitely talked to like teammates about how much they make, how much I should ask for, that kind of thing. I've even like straight up asked my recruiters who have given me offers, I'll ask them like where that falls within the band of, you know, what they're giving me. So if they're giving me like E3, for example, all of you are new grads or will be new grads when you start full time, you can essentially just ask what the band for E3 is, or you can look it up on levels.fyi or something. And now you essentially know what you can ask for without feeling bad. Yeah, TC is total compensation. It's like the abbreviated form that people use. But yeah, like do your research, figure out how much you should be getting paid, and then ask for it without feeling bad for anyone. Yeah, so LeetCode, actually, okay, when I was in college, I never LeetCoded. I did this website called Daily Coding Problem. It sends you a coding problem a day. What I really liked about it was that it can send you an easy one day and a hard the next. And that's really nice because I think when you go on LeetCode, you just end up doing easies all the time because you're like, this is what I can do comfortably, or you'll do mediums all the time, but you'll never like push yourself harder of your own free will. And so it was really nice to just get sent a problem. And I said, okay, look, every day I'm going to do this one problem. And so in college, right, doing one problem a day for 3 years while I was in college, that's almost 1,000 problems like over the course of 3 years, which is a ton if you LeetCode. Nowadays, like when I'm, you know, working, I don't do that many. I think I would recommend, even though I don't do it, to do like one a week if you're looking to interview soon-ish. And then as you get closer to the interview, maybe do one a day, that kind of thing. I am interviewing at Google, which is kind of fun. I'm making a TikTok series about it because, sorry, my phone triggered. I'm making a series about it because it's kind of fun to talk about like, oh, I'm interviewing here. This is what I'm doing to prep. I just got back from the technical screen. Here's how it went, that kind of stuff. And so if you want to follow along with that, that's on the TikTok. That's the one linked up above, but I'm not trying to like get followers or anything from this. Like follow along if you think that'd be fun to see. Yeah, too time heavy on YouTube. I have one. I have like 100 something subscribers on it just because I like link to it from my TikTok. But yeah, it takes a lot of time to film a YouTube video. A TikTok I can film in between meetings, like the 10 minutes I have in between meetings, I can film a video and like share some advice or kind of like share what's going on in my life. But YouTube takes a lot of time to film well. Any other questions? In terms of interviewing, I would do mock interviews with friends. That would be like my priority number one if I were in college, and that's what I did in college. I actually got the chance to interview at a lot of companies earlier than most people, so like in my freshman year, and or my freshman sophomore year, and so in my sophomore and junior years at UCR, I did mock interviews for like anyone and everyone, which also helped me because I'm the one giving the interview, so I'm on like the other side of the table here. Oh no. Did my screen sharing get paused? How did that happen? Okay, weird. Yeah, I would do mock interviews with people. It's also helpful to be on the other side of the table. The ideal like setting for me would be like find a group of 2 other friends. Anything more is like too big. Have everyone do one problem a day or a weekend or something, and then you all meet up, and then you have your problem that you're going to interview everyone else with. And that way, like you now know one problem very intimately, and you also get a very real world interview experience on 2 other problems. And so like that's kind of like the framework I would adopt for interviewing. I also have a series about interviewing on my TikTok, just putting it out there, on like how to give a good interview. Yeah, choosing offers between different companies mostly for me comes down to compensation and team match. So essentially, like how well do I like vibe, quote unquote, with the manager? What is the composition of the team? How many senior engineers are there? Are there good mentorship opportunities for me? That kind of stuff. And also compensation, like who's paying the most. So typically, what I'll try to do is like find the company that gives me the best quote unquote vibe on the team and ask them to match the higher offer. Or if they are also the highest offer, then I'm probably taking them. And then, I'll like bump their compensation up a little bit too. So for example, for like the most recent job interviewing cycle I had an offer from Stripe that had an offer in like the 280-ish range, and Plaid's was 250-ish. But I chose Plaid over Stripe because Stripe has this like cash value grant policy now, which is like not as beneficial as the 4-year RSU vesting policy. There's like a lot of specifics here, and you can feel free to Google like Stripe's cash value grant policy now. But essentially, it doesn't make the higher offer as inviting as a lower offer that follows a traditional 4-year Stripe grant. And so even though I liked the Stripe team, I liked my Plaid team as well. They were offering less, but like this compensation was like way different and much better in my opinion at Plaid, so I chose that. And also I like really liked my team at Plaid, which was really good. Negotiation for new grad offers. Generally, like, okay, number one piece of advice, maybe this feels like a top-out answer, have multiple offers. And so you can like bounce them off of each other. But also like, you can always ask for more money. The kind of framework that I've followed in his emails is like, you can say something like, I am interviewing at like these other companies that are coming up this week. This is gonna like take me until this day to decide. But if you offer, or like if we can get to a total compensation of X number, like just insert a very hard number, then like I'm willing to stop interviews and like sign right away. And as long as that X number that you gave them is within the band, then that's fine. You could even say like if we were able to get to a total compensation of X dollars, I'm thinking X base, Y RSUs, Y, like Z sign on, then I would be willing to sign, etc. And that's what I did for mini grad offers as well. That's also how I negotiated my Facebook sign-on bonus to like 100 grand, even though they offered me like 50 at the beginning. And I was like, I knew kind of like from working there what the outer band for the sign-on bonus was. And so I like negotiated higher on it. Yeah, so you should go to levels.fyi, the website, and essentially, yeah, it's fantastic. And so basically, it talks about each level at the company, so like junior, mid, senior engineers. You can also compare these levels across companies for a role. So you can say for a new grad, what does Google pay versus Microsoft versus Facebook versus Amazon? And then you can kind of choose your offers or even choose the companies you apply at in terms of that. Fantastic website. You should also look at like the benefits as well that each company offers. I didn't know that this website had that section until much later, where you can like click into a company and like go to like that company page and then click on benefits, because the cash value of the company's benefits is also something you should consider, I think. So for example, like if a company offers like 20 days of PTO versus 25 days of PTO, that has a really like it has a very real value behind it, and something you should consider. Yeah, I don't have a car right now, and I'm not planning on buying one. I live in Seattle, so like it's very busable, walkable. Um, if I do buy a car, it'll probably be like a cheap Prius or something that I can like, like something that I should be able to just like pay with out of kind of like 1 or 2 paychecks. And I would want a hybrid, even though a 96 Corolla I understand is a very dependable car. Um, yeah, I also don't want to pay for gas. But it depends on where you live. I think like, yeah, I don't know. If you live in like Texas or you choose to take an offer in like Austin or something, then you might want to have a car because Texas is very like driver centric. I would buy a car in full. Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm just personally against like increasing monthly expenses by any means. And so if it takes me longer to save up for a car, that's fine with me. But yeah, I'm buying in full. Used as well. Don't buy new cars, please. It's useless to buy a new car. Location matters somewhat. When I chose to work at Facebook as a new grad, they gave me three options. They said New York City, NorCal, or Seattle. The offers are flat across all locations. New York City, stupid expensive, and I didn't want to, like, New York City isn't my vibe. So that was a no. Choosing between NorCal and Seattle. NorCal is the Bay Area, it's where tons of tech companies are, but I had interned there and I didn't like the fact that when you live in NorCal, you're essentially living in a tech bubble. And I didn't want to live in a tech bubble, just personally. I don't think it's like beneficial to someone's life to live in a bubble of like wealth or something like this. And so like that was a no for me. Seattle, Washington, maybe more generally, doesn't have a state tax, fantastic access to the outdoors. And yeah, definitely not a tech bubble, at least yet. Lots of my friends here work in healthcare, or business, or finance. And it's useful to have those different perspectives in daily life. And so, yeah, that's how I kind of ended up working in Seattle or choosing Seattle. And now I work remotely. Like with Plaid, I can work anywhere I want, but I'm choosing to stay in Seattle, partially because I have a mortgage payment. And so, you know, I have a house that I need to continue paying for. Sad question. Sad question. Yeah, so I have friends from college. We actually we kind of made a pact for a bunch of us to move to Seattle together after college. So it was nice to have friends like already living here when you moved here, rather than like having to make a full new group of friends. Um, I meet them occasionally for like big events, so like Christmas, Valentine's Day, that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, definitely not as much as college, where you're kind of like forced to spend time with people, and therefore they become your friends. Whereas kind of like after college, it's like you are friends with someone and therefore you spend time with them. That like inverse relationship is a lot harder to maintain than like, oh yeah, we're friends because I see you every day in the ACM room, and you're cool, like you know we're friends. But you don't like see someone as often outside of college, unless you live like extremely close. Then like maybe, yeah. This is water, not pre-workout. It's 9 p.m. in Boston. Not a good time to have pre-workout. For me, it was pretty scary. I moved to Seattle like with a backpack and two cardboard boxes. That was like all of my belongings. Um, and yeah, like it's hard to like you know find an apartment, find friends, find coworkers, find restaurants that you like eating at, that kind of stuff. Um, but you like learn over time, I think, and especially when you have friends who also go there. Which you know, if any of you come to Seattle or choose to work in Seattle, feel free to like hit me up or like comment on my TikTok videos or send me an email or I don't know, Instagram, whatever people are using nowadays. Uh, LinkedIn messaging if you're a boomer. You know, whatever works, and we can hang out. But I was also excited about like making money and working in tech and kind of like seeing what the future holds, right? Like it's a very there's a big duality of feelings here. Yeah, okay, so buying a house, two parts here. One was a personal decision from like, you know, I really like Seattle, the area. And so I was like, if I buy a house, I'm probably going to buy one here. I can see myself living here for at least 5 to 7 years. That's like the minimum requirement. If you're going to buy a house and only live there for 2 years, you're much better off just like paying a lot of money for a very nice penthouse and like moving somewhere else. So for me, that was part personal decision, part financial decision, because kind of like when we closed on the mortgage, our interest rate was 2.25% for a 30-year mortgage, which is super low. Essentially 2.25% interest, so you're paying 2.25% compounding interest on the loan amount. And so by the time you're done paying off the house, you've actually paid more than the loan that you took out was. And so you want that interest amount to be as low as possible over like 30 years or 15 years or whatever mortgage term you choose. And so the financial aspect to the decision for buying a house, I looked at this calculator by the New York Times. It's a very popular like buy versus rent calculator, where you get to put in how much money you spend on rent, how much you expect for that to go up over time, how much house you would buy, how much money you expect that to go over time, what your down payment would be, and then how long you're planning on living there before you sell the house. And so like you basically plug all of these in and it says, if you can get a similar home or similar living experience as this house for this amount of money in rent, then you're better off renting. If you can't get a similar home for this much in rent, then you're better off buying and putting down however much you already said you're going to put down. So I would play around with that calculator as you get closer to buying a home. But I think you should start by making the personal decision of, are you going to live here for 5 to 7 years? If you're going to be renting it out, it's different. Like live there for a year because that's what the requirement is for your FHA mortgage, for a conventional mortgage loan. And then after a year, you can move out and rent it out or do whatever. If you're going to be renting it out, make sure again that the rent accounts for the cash flow of like maintenance costs, cleaning costs, your renter like moving out and the house being empty for like 6 months, that kind of stuff. So you need an emergency fund for your personal, for your personal expenses. You also need an emergency fund for your house where you can continue paying the mortgage for 6 to 12 months, even with no one in it and not paying your rent at all. I would always say 20%. Like I'm never going to buy a house for less than a 20% down payment. Like again, I want the lowest monthly interest rate. My whole ethos around payments, right, is always going to be like monthly payments suck. And so I'm going to try to have the minimum monthly payment I can. And the way you make your monthly payment lower is by putting more money down at the beginning. And so I would always say 20% down because that's like typically when you hit diminishing returns on down payment versus monthly rate. Are we good? Is that what you're saying, Vince?
All right.
Yeah, I think we're just about at time.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes. If anyone has any last questions, type it in chat real quick. And if not, I guess we can start wrapping things up. No last question.
No problem. Yeah, like I said, feel free to drop questions wherever makes sense. Yeah, if you do it on TikTok, I get to make a fun video about your question. So I would appreciate if you did, but you don't have to. You can feel free to put it in wherever. And also, I'll just drop my email in here as well. Yeah.
All right. And we also just compiled some of your other contact info.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
Yeah. If you guys are interested in following Aaroh on any of these platforms, be sure to check him out. And yeah, thank you so much for hosting today.
Yeah, of course. This is great.
All right. Then without further ado, we've got 1 minute left. Thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to see you guys soon. Just a few quick reminders. We have open board meetings on Mondays from 7 to 8 p.m. and election forms are also currently open. You can find them on the ACM website. So check those out if you're interested in running. And yeah, that's all. Thanks again. And that's all.
Bye-bye. See you later, everyone.